Did she just hug a homeless man in front of the mayor? Whispered someone in disbelief. The grand hall of the Charleston Public Library had fallen into a stunned silence. Moments ago, Claire Thompson, the beloved head librarian known for her quiet demeanor and crisp cardigans, had just concluded her speech at the library's reopening ceremony. But instead of basking in the applause, she was now sprinting down the marble aisle, white dress trailing behind, toward an elderly man in a frayed suit who had just stepped through the entrance. Gasps rose like a wave. Murmurs turned sharp. He's crashing the event. Why would she bring him here? Without hesitation, Claire threw her arms around the man. The crowd watched, frozen, as she held him tightly, whispering something only he could hear. His hair was neatly combed, his jacket carefully brushed, but the years were etched in every crease of his face. His trembling hand reached up, patting her shoulder. Then came the unmistakable roar of engines. 10 Navy officers in full ceremonial uniform marched through the doors in perfect step, the rhythmic echo of polished shoes slicing through the stunned silence. They halted in formation, turned toward Claire, and raised their right hands in unison, a formal salute. Gasps turned to stunned awe. Captain R. Delaney, the lead officer, took one step forward, his voice resonant. Today, we salute not only a librarian, but a woman whose quiet kindness restored a hero's will to live. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears. She held the old man's hand tighter. I still have your note, she whispered. He nodded slowly, his lips quivering, a single tear falling onto his worn lapel. The crowd remained motionless, unsure whether to clap or question what they had just witnessed. A young intern slowly lowered her phone, the video she had instinctively begun recording still rolling. In that suspended moment of awe, no one knew that the man in Claire's arms had once led troops through fire and chaos, nor that a simple pastry and kind smile had been his only anchor to life. Claire Thompson's day began long before the first patrons ever walked through the library's grand oak doors. At exactly 6:45 a.m., she arrived well before opening to prepare the quiet reading room, sort donations, and brew the first pot of coffee for staff. But there was one ritual she never missed, not in 6 years. Each morning, she placed a small cloth bag into her tote, one soft pastry, a paperback novel always gently used but thoughtfully chosen, and a handwritten note with a simple message, wishing you a peaceful morning. At 7:10 sharp, she exited through the side door, walked 2 blocks to the park bench outside the post office, and left the package next to a sleeping figure, the same man, every day, year after year. He never asked for anything, never begged, never even made eye contact. But when Claire passed by again on her way back, the items were always gone. Her co-workers noticed. Of course, at first it was mild curiosity. Then came the whispers. She's feeding that guy again. Shouldn't she be reporting him instead? She thinks she's saving the world, one cinnamon roll at a time. One afternoon, during a staff meeting, the library's new director, Mr. Avery, pulled Claire aside. You know, I admire your heart, Claire, he said, folding his arms. But it's been brought to my attention that your charity walks aren't exactly aligned with the library's image. Some board members have expressed concern. Claire listened, polite but unmoved. With all due respect, sir, she replied softly, what we represent here isn't just literacy, it's dignity. Avery blinked. Just be discreet. After that, Claire began leaving earlier. She swapped her cloth bag for a plain brown paper one. She took quieter routes and kept her eyes down. But somehow the judgment followed her. One morning, as she returned through the staff entrance, a new intern muttered under her breath to another librarian, "Still playing saint?" Huh. The words stung, not because Claire doubted what she was doing, but because no one else seemed willing to see what she saw. Not a nuisance, not a burden, but a man. A man who sat still every day as the world ignored him. And still, she persisted, because kindness to Claire was never about approval. Later that week, during a lunch break in the staff lounge, Claire overheard another conversation. I heard she's been doing this since forever. Someone said, biting into a granola bar. Honestly, I think it's inappropriate, another voice chimed in. It's not her job to be Mother Teresa. This is a library. not a soup kitchen. Claire sat quietly in the corner, stirring her tea. She didn't respond. She never did. But the ache lingered. That night, she stayed later than usual, shelving returned books in the biography section. As she slid a worn volume into place, her eyes paused on the title, Unsung Heroes, Ordinary Lives with Extraordinary Impact. She smiled faintly, then sighed. No medals, no ceremonies, just silent rituals and a hope that maybe, just maybe, her small acts mattered. 2 days before the library's reopening ceremony, Claire found a cream-colored envelope slipped beneath her office door. There was no return address. The handwriting on the front, delicate, slanted, unfamiliar, simply read, "For Claire." Inside was a single note written in black ink. "Tomorrow I will come not for books, but to repay a debt." That was all. No name, no explanation, no contact. Claire stared at the paper for a long moment, her fingers tracing the careful strokes of each letter. Her mind raced. Was it a friend, a prank? One of the veterans she'd helped through the community book exchange. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. Charleston had its share of eccentrics, but something about the handwriting tugged at a memory she couldn't quite place, like the echo of a voice in a dream. That night, she tucked the note into the pages of a worn novel beside her bed and tried to let it go. But it followed her through her dreams, through her morning routine, through the final chaotic preparations for the ceremony. The morning before the event, Claire stood in the reading room, adjusting a display of local author spotlights when her assistant, Melinda, walked in holding a newspaper. "Looks like we're getting some press," Melinda said, pointing to a small column about the reopening. Claire nodded absently, her thoughts still circling that strange message. As she scanned the headlines, her eyes caught on a name buried deep in the crime blotter. Nothing dramatic, just a mention of loitering dismissed by the city court. But the name beside it was familiar. Alan P. Could it be, she wondered? She shook her head, feeling ridiculous. There were dozens of Allens in Charleston. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's ceremony was about to turn into something far more than speeches and ribbon cuttings. Claire remembered the first time she found the note. It was a rainy Thursday in early December. The Charleston sky had been weeping since dawn, casting the streets in a damp gray silence. Her umbrella fought against the wind as she made her usual morning stop at the bench near the post office. The man was there, huddled beneath a threadbare coat, his shoes soaked through. That day, in addition to the pastry and the novel, Claire had wrapped her own wool scarf around the contents. She left it silently and turned away. The next morning, and when she returned, the scarf was gone, but something had been left in its place. A napkin, slightly damp, with faint pencil marks etched into the paper. The handwriting was shaky, almost unsure. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." Claire stared at the message for minutes, unmoving. She folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. From that day on, the note lived in her wallet, tucked behind her library ID. On days when the world felt especially cruel, when patrons yelled, or when the news seemed too heavy, she would take it out, unfold it, and run her fingers across the faded letters. In those moments, the rain, the scarf, the quiet bench all returned vividly. And so did the conviction that a small act, done with intention, could reach a soul buried beneath years of silence. She never saw herself as a savior. But that morning, she understood something that would never leave her. Kindness, offered without expectation, had the power to restore more than dignity. It could resurrect hope. There were other days too, days when Charleston's air bit with cold, when the streets were slick with sleet, and even stepping outside felt like a battle. Yet Claire always came. She began including tissues, heat packs, sometimes a short poem she'd copied by hand. She didn't know if he ever read them. He never responded again, but he was always there, same bench, same time, same quiet nod when their eyes met. To others, it was a man in rags. To Claire, it was someone who reminded her that behind every silence might be a story worth listening to. The sound of the lobby doors creaking open sliced through the low hum of chatter. Claire glanced up from the guest book table and froze. He was there, the man from the bench, standing just beyond the threshold of the newly restored Charleston Public Library, wearing a suit so old its stitching frayed at the cuffs, but pressed with meticulous care. His shoes, though cracked, gleamed with effort. His silver hair was combed neatly back, and in his hand, he clutched a small folded piece of paper. Conversations faltered, eyes turned. Whispers slithered across the marble floor. Is he lost? Someone should call security. Claire's heart clenched. Every instinct told her to stay composed, to follow protocol. But she didn't. Without a word, she stepped down from the stage, ignoring the MC, the photographers, the city officials waiting to shake her hand. Her heels clicked across the polished floor as she moved faster, then faster still. Gas rose as she broke into a full run. When she reached him, she threw her arms around him with a force that startled them both. I hoped you'd come, she whispered, her voice thick. The man didn't speak at first, but then, with a trembling breath, he held up the paper. I kept your notes, he said. Every single one. Claire pulled back, just enough to look at his face creased, fragile, but lit from within by a quiet fire. Around them, silence fell again. No one moved. No one understood. Yet, Claire could feel the stares from every corner of the room, judgmental, curious, confused. Her back was to the crowd now, but she imagined the narrowed eyes, the furrowed brows, the whispered assumptions already spreading like wildfire. She didn't care. This moment wasn't about public perception or polished speeches. It was about a man who had once been invisible and a quiet promise that he was seen. She gently placed her hand on his arm. Would you walk with me? He nodded, emotion shimmering in his tired eyes. Together, they turned and began walking toward the main aisle. People parted, uncertain, like witnessing something sacred. A low, synchronized thud rolled across the marble floor, sharp and sudden like a drumbeat. Heads turned. The double doors of the library swung open. 10 Navy officers stepped into the hall, dressed in full ceremonial uniform. The light from the chandeliers gleamed off their brass buttons and polished shoes. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the officers moved with clockwork precision, forming two perfect columns leading down the central aisle. At their lead was a tall man with silver hair and a chest full of medals. His nameplate read Captain R. Delaney. Witterfarting. He came to a halt just feet from Claire and raised his hand in salute. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. We come on behalf of the United States Navy not to honor a war hero, but to honor the woman who brought one back. Murmurs erupted. All eyes shifted to the man beside Claire, whose worn suit now looked noble beneath the room's grand lighting. Delaney continued, This is Commander Alan Pierce. In 2005, he led a rescue mission in Mosul that saved 11 Marines. For that, he was awarded the Silver Star. He never claimed it. After losing his wife and daughter in 2016, he chose to disappear. The room stood breathless. But for 6 years, Miss Thompson fed a man she thought was invisible. She gave him food, books, and kindness. And because of her, he remembered he was still a man. Claire's hands trembled. Alan turned to her, pulled out a small, folded slip of paper, and handed it over. You wrote this to me with a copy of Old Man in the Sea, he said. It said, wishing you a peaceful morning. I read it every night for a year. A hush fell once more, not of shock this time, but reverence. Claire looked down at the note, now worn at the edges but still whole. The handwriting was hers, but the meaning had deepened. What once had been a quiet act of compassion had become a lifeline. The captain turned back to the crowd. Not all heroes seek medals. Not all sacrifices are made in battle. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a cinnamon pastry and a borrowed book. The hall stood still, no flashbulbs, no clapping. Just a collective breath held in awe of a story unfolding in silence. In the weeks that followed, Claire and her husband transformed the quiet room at the back of the library into something more than a reading space. They called it the Reading Room Project. Every morning before sunrise, the couple arrived early. They laid out donated books on low shelves, brewed fresh coffee, and set out trays of simple breakfasts, hard-boiled eggs, oatmeal, fruit. No IDs were required. No names were asked. The sign above the entrance read, For those who've served and those still finding their way. The first morning, only 2 veterans came. By the end of the month, there were nearly 20. Alan Pierce returned only once quietly, without warning. He stood in the doorway, watching as Claire offered a cup of tea to a man in a frayed jacket, then slipped a paperback into his coat pocket. He didn't say a word, but when he left, a folded note remained behind on the table. "I'm seeing a counselor now, and sleeping indoors. Thank you for giving me back a reason to try." Claire kept the note pinned behind the counter, right above a copy of Old Man and the Sea. Every time she saw it, she smiled. It was never about fixing anyone. It was about making sure no one disappeared. And in that small room, with its chipped mugs and worn pages, lives were quietly beginning again. Volunteers began joining former librarians, retired teachers, even a local baker who brought fresh loaves once a week. It became more than a meal or a book. It became a place where veterans could linger, speak, or sit in peace. One man started writing poetry again. Another, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in months, began teaching chess to the younger vets. Claire never pushed. She only smiled, served coffee, and listened. Sometimes the greatest impact came not from grand speeches, but from offering someone a seat, a story, and the dignity of being seen. Not everyone who wears a uniform asks to be remembered. Not every hero holds a medal. Some heroes sit quietly on a bench, hoping for warmth, for silence, for someone to see them. Claire didn't need to know Alan's story to do the right thing. She didn't need proof of valor to show compassion, and you don't need to be extraordinary to make a difference. All it takes is the courage to look past the surface. So the next time you pass someone who seems invisible, look again. There may be a story behind those eyes, a history behind the silence, a life worth seeing. Because when we choose to see, we choose to heal. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button to show you believe in quiet kindness. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been seen in a moment you needed it most? And subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where we honor the untold stories of dignity, courage, and compassion. Help us grow a community that chooses to see not just with eyes, but with heart. Until next time, thank you for watching. We'll see you again in the next story.